someone burned the American flag at Hampshire College in Amherst after the presidential election. The college then decided not to fly the flag for a time to allow for discussion and reflection. Well, Hampshire College did raise the flag again on campus last Friday, December 2nd. But in the meantime, there was protest in support of our flag. One of the protesters, military veteran, State Representative John Velis of Westfield, spoke with Connecting Point correspondent Carolee McGrath about this controversy.
To me, it's nothing short of a national disgrace to take away our flag, but even rewinding a couple weeks before, as a veteran, but really as an American, to burn our flag on Veterans Day. I just think it's morally reprehensible. But to take the flag down and to say that the reason we're doing this is so we can focus on, any number of issues, very important issues, anti-Semitism, LGBTQ issues, racism, etc. Let's talk about those issues. But to say we can't do that unless the flag is down, that defies logic. It's absurd.
You're a captain in the Army. You served in Afghanistan. Tell us a little bit about your service and what you've been hearing from other veterans about this.
Irate. I mean, too many people have given too much in defense of that flag. The KIA killed in action those who are now without a limb, not to mention the thousands upon thousands of veterans and service members who are suffering from PTSD, TBI, traumatic brain injury. Just to take that down, I mean, if you really want to talk about it and think about it, without the sacrifice of our service members and veterans, we're not having this discussion about the First Amendment and freedom of expression. They are exercising that right, the students at Hampshire College, the president and the board of trustees, because of what service members have done. Without them, you're not having this conversation. So to suggest that we can't have this flag up in order to have those discussions, it defies logic.
Some people would say, as disgusting as it may seem to most people, that the flag would be burned. Hey, listen, it's protected under the First Amendment, which is what, you were called to defend.
Absolutely.
As much as we detest it or people detest it, shouldn't we try to make sure that that right is always protected?
Absolutely. And any service member or veteran will tell you the same thing. We fight in order to defend that right. But I'm now pushing aside the burning of the flag. Mm-hmm. Now I'm talking about taking it down. Absolutely. If you want to burn a flag, if that's what makes you happy, so be it. It's disgusting, and I'm entitled to my First Amendment right to say that. But we're talking about now the flag being taken down in order to have discussions on other topics, as if they're mutually exclusive.
Now, the college has said, and I know in one of them was a Facebook post, that this was not necessarily a commentary on the election, but really a way to have a discussion about what the flag means to different people. And one spokesman had said in particular that while some see the flag as a true symbol, of America, others see it as a symbol of fear. What's your response to that?
I guess fear of what? But let's assume that argument, let's just assume for purposes of this conversation that's true. Why does it need to be down? Why does it need to be down? I just don't get it. At Hampshire College, and I think academia in general today, there's kind of this sentiment that's growing, and I want to be somewhat careful in what I say, but I think academia is going down a dangerous path to a certain degree. They're almost putting up all these protective layers, and they don't want to expose students to really what the outside world is. And in my humble opinion, and I'm digressing here a little bit, I think they're doing the students a disservice, because you know as well as I know that's not the real world.
But do you think they're coddling the students?
I think that's an understatement. And not just in this instance. You talk about all these discussions right now in academia, these trigger warnings, et cetera, and we're going to do everything we can to protect our students from being exposed to these conversations. But once they graduate, those protections are no longer in place. So to me, that's doing them a disservice. But the Hampshire College president talks about diversity and disruptions. Well, veterans aren't part of that diversity. If you ask me, it's the veterans and service members. They're the ones who allow us to have that conversation about diversity.
Now, you're a Democrat.
Correct.
Were you happy with the election results?
I think the election results, I think if November 8th proved anything, it's that the American people in general are fed up with the system. I think that President-elect Trump's victory, if it showed anything, I think what he's really done is he's challenged the status quo. He said, the way this is going, folks, it's broken. If you look at the approval ratings of members of Congress, it's at an all-time low. And I think that all kind of goes back to people hate the institution in general, but we always reelect our congressmen and our congresswomen. I'm anxiously awaiting to see what he does. As a service member, I'm going to be paying close attention to who he picks as Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, but it's going to be interesting. But I think there's a lot of folks, particularly in the Democratic Party, who really need to think about the way going forward. I know Congressman Neal has talked about the Democratic Party might need to, at some point in time, press a reset button. I mean, if you look at the electoral map, you have the Democrats being the party of the coast.
Right.
But the middle of the country is going Republican. We're losing governorships. We're losing legislatures, Congress. And you know, as a moderate Democrat or a conservative Democrat, whatever you want to call me, I really think it's time to have a conversation about bringing some of those more moderate conservative elements to the party. That's if we want to compete nationally, to go after those rust belts, to say something. You know, I just recently read an article, and interrupt me anytime I'm going on too long, about how the Democratic Party, to a certain degree, has become a little bit too focused on cultural issues. Some of the issues that matter to a good amount of people, they matter to me. I voted in support of them. But to the average John and Jane Doe, that's not necessarily what they're concerned about at the end of the day. The middle class is concerned about jobs, 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 the economy. And I think that President-elect Trump and his campaign team did a much better job speaking to what people are concerned about right now.
But what about the reaction? Because clearly on the coast, especially, and in the big cities, the reaction has been many protests, a lot of younger people out there really upset with the election results. How would you advise them going forward? You know, do you continue to protest? Some of those turned into riots, some of those turned into dangerous situations, or do you say, hey, there's a different path? How would you advise those kids?
Well, for starters, I would say stop protesting. I mean, elections have consequences. And, you know, and then there's been a lot of chatter about maybe we should abolish the Electoral College. It's very similar to the debate about filibusters. Right. Every party doesn't want a filibuster until they need a filibuster. You know, the roles could change in 4 years from now. My response is kind of what we just talked about. Instead of talking about let's change the system, let's start to listen to what the people want. And I think, again, if November 8th proved anything, it's that the Democratic Party might need to realign themselves. I mean, there's something that Democrats are missing that the Republicans are espousing that's resonating with the people. And as a political party, if we don't start to adjust fire and respond to that and basically enact policies that are a reflection of that, could be in some trouble.
What does the flag mean to you?
Everything. It's what this country is. Every conversation that we have, equality, freedom, liberty, that's all kind of symbolized by that flag. When we put on our Army uniforms and every other service members, we've got the flag on our soldier. We're willing to fight, die, lose a limb, come back with any number of afflictions, fighting for that. It means everything.
State Rep John Velis, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspective on this.
Thanks for having me.